My name is Jordan Ellis. I'm 29 years old, and 14 months ago I found out that the reason I couldn't hold a job for 3 years, the reason I kept losing opportunities I'd worked my entire life for, wasn't bad luck. It wasn't the economy. It wasn't me. It was my parents. My own mother and father had been calling every single employer I applied to, over 40 companies in 3 years, and telling them I had a felony conviction for assault and drug distribution, that I was a liability, that they were doing the company a favor by warning them there was no conviction, there was no arrest, there was no criminal record of any kind. There was only me, a 29-year-old data analyst with a 3.9 GPA from Fordham University, 2 recommendation letters from professors who called me exceptional, and a LinkedIn profile that should have opened doors. Instead, every door slammed shut before I could even knock. What I'm about to tell you took me 3 years of confusion, 6 months of investigation, 1 very sharp attorney, and 1 courtroom in Westchester County, New York to fully understand. And when I finally understood it, when I sat in that conference room at the law offices of Hargrove Patel and watched the evidence laid out in front of me like a crime scene, I didn't cry. I felt something much colder than sadness. I felt clarity. Before I continue, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely want to know how this story ends. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there, because this story is long, and it's ugly, and it's real, and I want to know you're here with me. Now let me take you back to where this all began. Let me tell you about the Ellis family of Larchmont, New York. From the outside, we looked like a success story. My father, Douglas Ellis, 58, was a senior loan officer at Meridian Capital Bank in White Plains. He drove a 2019 BMW 5 Series and wore a Citizen Eco-Drive watch he polished every Sunday morning like it was a ritual. My mother, Pamela Ellis, 55, was a part-time real estate staging consultant who spent the rest of her time managing what she liked to call the family's image. That phrase, the family's image, was the operating system of our household. Everything we did was filtered through it. The cars we drove, the church we attended, Christ Episcopal on Palmer Avenue, where my mother sat in the 4th pew from the front every single Sunday. The neighborhood dinner parties where my father laughed too loudly and my mother made sure everyone knew my brother Tyler had just been accepted to Dartmouth. Tyler, my older brother by 4 years. Tyler Douglas Ellis, 33, the golden child, the heir apparent, the son my parents had always wanted and got. I should tell you something important. Tyler is not a bad person. He's just oblivious in the way that only a person who has never once had to fight for anything can be. He floated through our household on a cushion of expectation. My parents paid his full tuition at Dartmouth, $54,200 a year, while I took out $67,000 in student loans to attend Fordham. They bought him a 2017 Honda Accord as a graduation gift. I took the Metro North to my internships. None of that bothered me the way you might expect. I'd made peace with the favoritism a long time ago. I told myself it was generational stuff, the firstborn son and all that. I focused on myself. I worked hard. I graduated in May 2018 with a Bachelor of Science in Data Analytics and a minor in Computer Science. I had internship experience at 2 mid-sized marketing firms in Manhattan. I had skills. I had ambition. What I didn't have was any idea what my parents had already started doing. The first rejection hit in August 2018, 3 months after graduation, a data analyst position at Kestrel Marketing Solutions in Midtown Manhattan. The salary was $62,000 a year plus benefits. I'd aced the phone screen. The hiring manager, a woman named Dana Cho, had told me I was exactly what they were looking for. Then she stopped responding to my follow-up emails. I assumed it was competition. New York is brutal. I kept applying. The second rejection came in October 2018, a junior analyst role at Brightfield Data Group in Jersey City. Third rejection, November 2018, a tech startup in the Flatiron District. Fourth, a market research firm in Stamford, Connecticut, which would have been a 20-minute commute from Larchmont. By early 2019, I had applied to 31 positions and had 0 job offers, not even second-round interviews. I was living in my childhood bedroom at my parents' house, paying $400 a month in rent that my mother had started charging me in December 2018, which she said was, "To keep you motivated, Jordan." My father started making comments at dinner. "Maybe data analytics isn't the right fit for you. Have you thought about trade school? Tyler's already been promoted at Deloitte. Maybe you should ask him for advice." I told myself they were just worried, that they didn't know how to show support. I started seeing a therapist, Dr. Angela Rowan, who had her practice on Boston Post Road in Larchmont. At $150 a session, which I paid for out of the part-time bartending money I was making at a place called the Harbor Tap in New Rochelle, Dr. Rowan helped me work through what she called a confidence erosion cycle. The job market is brutal for entry-level analysts right now, she told me. Don't internalize other people's decisions as judgments about your worth. That was good advice. I just didn't know yet that those decisions weren't random. I should have known something was wrong when my college roommate Marcus Webb, who had a 3.4 GPA and one less internship than me, landed a junior analyst position at Goldman Sachs' data division in September 2018, 3 months after graduation. When my classmate Priya Shetty, who had graduated with honors, got a role at Deloitte in the same month. When everyone I knew from Fordham's data analytics cohort had moved on, and I was still behind a bar pouring IPAs for stockbrokers, I should have known, but I didn't, because I had no reason, none, to look at my parents and see the truth. That changed in March 2021. It started with a voicemail. I had applied in February 2021 to a data analyst position at Northbridge Consulting Group, a mid-sized firm with offices in White Plains and Manhattan. The salary range was $68,000, $74,000. I knew people there. One of my Fordham professors, Dr. Charles Rennick, had a consulting relationship with the firm and had personally forwarded my resume to the director of analytics, a man named Paul Trevisan. This wasn't a cold application. This had an internal referral from a respected academic. This should have been different. The phone screen went beautifully. Paul Trevisan was enthusiastic. He said, verbatim, "Dr. Rennick doesn't recommend people lightly. I'm going to fast-track your file." We scheduled an in-person interview for March 15th. On March 12th, 3 days before my interview, I got a voicemail from Paul Trevisan's assistant saying that the position had been internally restructured and they would be pausing all external hiring. I'd heard variations of that line before, but this time, something was different. Something nagged at me. I called Dr. Rennick. There was a long pause on the phone after I told him about the cancellation. "Jordan," he said carefully, "I'm going to be honest with you because I think you deserve honesty. Paul Trevisan called me this morning. He said that your application had raised a flag. Something about a background check concern. He mentioned that someone had contacted their HR department directly with information about you." I felt the floor tilt. "What kind of information?" I asked. "He didn't give me specifics," Dr. Rennick said. "But Jordan, I've known you for 5 years. I don't believe whatever they heard. And I think you need to find out who's saying what about you." I thanked him. I hung up. I sat in my car in the parking lot of a Starbucks on Central Avenue in White Plains for 45 minutes without moving. Someone was calling employers about me. My first thought was a disgruntled coworker from one of my internships. My second thought was an ex-girlfriend, but that made no sense. My third thought, the one that hit me last and hardest, was the one I immediately dismissed as too awful to consider. It couldn't be my parents. I pushed the thought away. Instead, I did something I should have done. 3 years earlier, I called a background check company. Specifically, I signed up for a monitoring service through Checker and also requested my personal background report through the National Consumer Reporting Agency. Both came back clean. No arrests, no convictions, no criminal record of any kind. So whatever someone was telling these companies wasn't on paper. It was a phone call, a voice, a story. Then came the night that broke everything open. April 2nd, 2021. My parents had people over for dinner, the Holloways from down the street, Gary and Sandra's sister Denise, who was visiting from Charlotte. I'd come home late from my shift at the Harbor Tap. I was still in my bartender clothes, black pants, white button-down, when I came in through the kitchen door and heard my mother's voice from the living room. She didn't know I was home. "I just think Jordan hasn't really found himself yet," I heard her say. "It's a concern we've had for a while. Some people just aren't meant for corporate environments." "Such a shame," Sandra Holloway said. "After Fordham and everything." "Well," my mother said, and her voice dropped, "but the kitchen has good acoustics," and I stood very still. There were some issues in college we don't really talk about. Nothing public. But certain employers have asked us questions directly, and we've always been honest. I stopped breathing. Employers had asked. My parents. Questions, or was it the other way around? I didn't confront her that night. I went upstairs, sat on my childhood bed, and made a decision that would take me 6 months to fully execute. I decided I was going to find out exactly what was happening, and I was going to get proof. I know some of you watching have been through something similar, someone you trusted sabotaging you so quietly you couldn't even name it. If this is resonating, drop a comment below, let me know you're here. Because what I found out over the next 6 months will change how you think about family, loyalty, and what people are capable of when they're afraid of losing control. Make sure you're subscribed. This gets intense. I want to be clear about something. I didn't just react. I didn't confront my parents in a rage the morning after that dinner party and blow everything up. I thought carefully. I was strategic, because if I was right about what was happening, I was going to need evidence that no one could deny. The first thing I did was contact an attorney. Her name is Victoria Hargrove. She's a partner at Hargrove Patel, LLP, a firm specializing in employment law and civil litigation with offices on Mamaroneck Avenue in White Plains. I found her through a Fordham Alumni Network recommendation. I sat across from her on April 9, 2021, and told her everything I suspected. She listened without interrupting. Then she said, "What you're describing, if proven, would constitute tortious interference with prospective economic advantage, defamation, and potentially fraud. The challenge is evidence. What can you get?" "I'll get whatever you need," I said. We hired a licensed private investigator, Raymond Okafor, through Victoria's firm at a rate of $195 per hour. I paid his initial retainer of $2340 for my savings. Raymond's task was simple but delicate. Contact a selection of the companies that had rejected me over the past 3 years. Identify whether any of them had received unsolicited calls about my character. And if so, find out what was said and who said it. Over the following 6 weeks, Raymond reached out to 11 former employers on my rejection list, posing as a reference verification consultant conducting a routine audit. Of those 11 companies, 7 confirmed they had received unsolicited phone calls prior to or during my application process, raising concerns about my background. 7 out of 11. The callers identified themselves differently each time, sometimes as a concerned family member, sometimes as a former colleague, twice as someone from Jordan's past who felt the company deserved to know. But Raymond, who was exceptionally good at his job, secured phone number records through legal discovery channels, and when those numbers were traced back through phone carrier subpoenas filed by Victoria Hargrove's office under case reference UHT 2021-4471, they all led back to 2 cell phone numbers. One was registered to Douglas M. Ellis, my father. The other was registered to Pamela J. Ellis, my mother. I remember sitting in Victoria's office when she showed me the carrier records. They were printed on white paper, clean and official, time-stamped and carrier certified. I looked at my father's number next to a call log showing 7 outgoing calls to HR departments across New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut. I looked at my mother's number and saw 4 additional calls, including one to Northbridge Consulting Group on March 10, 2021, 2 days before Paul Trevison's assistant called to cancel my interview. "Are you okay?" Victoria asked me. I looked up. "What specifically did they say?" She slid another document across the desk. It was a sworn statement from Dana Cho, the hiring manager from Kestrel Marketing Solutions, who had stopped responding to my emails in August 2018. She had agreed to provide a declaration. The statement, signed and notarized on May 28, 2021, read in part, "I received an unsolicited call at the Kestrel HR line on August 14, 2018. The caller identified herself as a family member of the applicant Jordan Ellis. She stated that Jordan Ellis had a prior conviction for assault causing bodily harm and had been involved in drug distribution activities. She said she was warning us out of concern for our employees. Based on this call, I made the decision to remove Jordan Ellis from our candidate pool without further discussion with the hiring team." August 14, 2018. 3 weeks after I graduated from Fordham, my mother had started making calls before I'd even landed my first real interview. Victoria's firm eventually collected sworn declarations from 4 former hiring managers. Combined with the phone carrier records and a forensic analysis of call timing correlated against my application submissions, which showed that in 9 of 11 documented cases, a call was made to the employer within 14 days of my application submission, we had built something airtight. We also discovered something else, something that added a dimension I hadn't anticipated in cross-referencing my application timeline with my parents' financial records, which Victoria obtained through the civil discovery process once we filed our complaint in Westchester County Supreme Court on September 3, 2021, case number 2021 CV 8847. We found that in November 2018, my father had transferred $22,500 from a joint account into a separate account in Tyler's name. In April 2019, another $18,000. In January 2020, $31,000. A total of $71,500 transferred to my brother Tyler over 2 years. Money that corresponded almost exactly with the period my parents were sabotaging my career. Tyler, when deposed, was genuinely shocked. He had believed the money was a gift and a loan. He had no idea his parents had been sabotaging my job applications. He provided a full cooperative deposition on October 14, 2021, and subsequently returned $71,500 to an escrow account as part of the civil proceedings. Tyler's cooperation ultimately helped the case significantly. When I asked Victoria what this financial pattern suggested, she said, "It suggests they needed you to fail, Jordan. If you had become financially independent, you might have moved out, maybe moved away, and their control over the family dynamic and their ability to favor Tyler with your failure as the backdrop would have ended." That was the part that broke me, not dramatically, not with crying and collapsing. It broke me quietly, the way old wood splinters, slowly, invisibly, and then all at once. They hadn't done it out of hatred. They'd done it out of fear. Fear that I'd leave. Fear of the image, the family, fracturing. Fear that if I succeeded, the fragile architecture of our household, which required one person to be less than so another could feel more than, would collapse. That understanding didn't make me forgive them, but it made the whole thing feel real in a way that pure malice never could have. We didn't do this at a family dinner. We didn't do it at Christmas. Victoria Hargrove is a professional, and she was very clear. The confrontation, to the extent there was one, needed to happen in a controlled legal environment. On November 8, 2021, my parents were served with civil complaint documents at their home on Edgewood Avenue, Larchmont, New York. The complaint named both Douglas M. Ellis and Pamela J. Ellis as defendants in alleged tortious interference with prospective economic advantage, defamation per se, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. I was not there when they were served. I was at Marcus Webb's apartment in Hoboken, New Jersey, where I'd been living for 6 weeks after finally moving out of my parents' house in September. My mother called me 40 minutes after service. I didn't answer. My father called twice that evening. I didn't answer. 3 days later, on November 11th, I received a text message from my father. It said, "Jordan, please talk to us. Whatever you think happened, it's more complicated than you know. We love you and we're scared. Please call." I screenshotted it and forwarded it to Victoria. The first deposition of my father was scheduled for December 2nd, 2021, at Hargrove Patel's offices. I sat in the room. I watched my father, a man who had polished his watch every Sunday morning, who had laughed too loudly at dinner parties, who had told me at least a dozen times that I needed to try harder, sit across from a court reporter and lie. "I never called any of those companies," he said. Victoria slid the carrier records across the table, his own cell number. Time-stamped outgoing calls to Kestrel Marketing Solutions, Brightfield Data Group, Northbridge Consulting Group. 7 companies, 11 calls total from his number alone. He looked at the paper for a long time, his hands were trembling. Douglas, his attorney, a man named Gerald Fitch from a White Plains firm, said quietly, "We discussed this." My father looked up at me. For a moment, something moved across his face that I can only describe as recognition, the look of someone seeing a consequence they had decided wasn't possible for a very long time. "I was protecting the family," he said. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Victoria was already making notes. My mother's deposition was December 9th. She cried from the moment she sat down. Her mascara ran. Her hands shook as she accepted the box of tissues from the court reporter. She told a story in which everything she had done was motivated by a mother's love. She had been told by a family friend that I was involved in bad things in college, and she had simply been trying to protect employers from a liability. When Victoria showed her the phone records, including the call to Northbridge on March 10th, 2021, she went white. "Who was the family friend who told you Jordan had a criminal record?" Victoria asked. My mother looked at the table. "I don't remember their name." "You told 4 hiring managers that your son, your own child, had a felony conviction for assault and drug distribution. You've been unable to name a single source for this information. Is it possible, Mrs. Ellis, that there was no such source, and that this was a story you and your husband constructed?" Silence. Her attorney objected. She was instructed not to answer, but the silence was its own answer. The settlement conference was held on February 14th, 2022, Valentine's Day, which I did not find poetic so much as grimly appropriate, at the Westchester County Supreme Court on Main Street in White Plains, before Judge Patricia Holden Watts. My parents settled. They had no viable defense. The phone records, the sworn declarations from 4 hiring managers, the call timing correlations, and my father's stumbling in deposition had made trial an unwinnable prospect for Gerald Fitch's team. The settlement terms, which I can share because they were filed as part of the public court record. My parents agreed to pay $287,400 in damages, which included $67,000 representing my outstanding student loan balance, $89,000 in estimated lost wages, calculated over the 38-month period of documented sabotage based on my entry-level market salary benchmarks, $81,400 in general damages for emotional distress and harm to professional reputation, and $50,000 in attorney's fees. The settlement also required them to sign legally binding written retractions delivered by certified mail to every employer documented in the case, stating that all previous communications regarding Jordan Ellis's background were false and retracted in full. They also agreed, as part of a parallel agreement negotiated by Victoria, to cease all contact with me for a period of 5 years, subject to a court-enforceable restraining provision. Gerald Fitch tried one last thing in that conference room. He leaned forward and said to Victoria, "My clients would like to express for the record that this was an act of—" "Mr. Fitch," Judge Holden Watts said, "the record is clear enough." What would you have done? Comment 1 if you would have confronted your parents the moment you suspected them. Comment 2 if you would have built the case quietly like I did. Comment 3 if you think you would have walked away and never looked back. I genuinely want to know. And if you're still here, thank you. The ending matters. Here's what no one tells you about getting justice. It doesn't feel the way you think it will. I thought I'd feel triumphant. I thought I'd feel the kind of cathartic release you see in movies, where the person who's been wronged stands in a beam of light and exhales and everything resets. Instead, I drove home from the settlement conference in a rental car I'd borrowed from Marcus, and I sat in the parking lot of a Panera Bread on Mamaroneck Avenue. And I felt very, very tired. Not sad, not angry, just tired. And strangely light, the way you feel after carrying something heavy for so long that your arms don't know what to do without the weight. That was February 2022. This is where I am now, 14 months later. In March 2022, 3 weeks after the settlement, I applied to a data analyst position at Crestfield Analytics, a mid-sized firm headquartered in Stamford, Connecticut. The salary range was $72,000, $79,000 per year. I went through 4 rounds of interviews. On April 4th, 2022, I received an offer at $76,500 annually, plus a $5,000 signing bonus. I accepted before the email had fully loaded. I cried in my car in the Hoboken parking garage where I always took calls I didn't want Marcus to overhear. Not from sadness. From the simple, overwhelming feeling of a door finally opening after years of knocking on walls. I started on April 18th. My manager, a woman named Claire Osborne, pulled me aside after my first week and told me I was already ahead of where they expected. I don't think I've ever been prouder of 2 sentences in my life. I used $67,000 of the settlement to pay off my student loans in full in March 2022. Gone, paid, done. I still remember hitting the final payment button on the Navient portal at 11:43 p.m. on a Thursday night, sitting in Marcus's spare bedroom and refreshing the screen 3 times to make sure the balance actually said $0. In August 2022, I signed a lease on a 1-bedroom apartment in Stamford, $1,875 a month, my first place that was entirely, undeniably, completely mine. I bought a bed frame from IKEA and put it together myself over a full Sunday afternoon with a YouTube tutorial and a feeling I can only describe as ceremony. I framed my Fordham diploma and hung it on the wall across from the bed where I could see it every morning. I've been in therapy consistently since April 2021, now with Dr. Simone Achibi in Stamford. We've done a lot of work on what I call the recalibration, the process of unlearning the belief installed in me over decades that I was the lesser one, the one who couldn't, the one who needed to be protected from himself. It's slow work. I won't pretend otherwise. Tyler and I have spoken. He called me in June 2022, about 4 months after the settlement. It was a hard conversation and a necessary one. He knew none of what our parents had done. He was genuinely horrified. He said, "At one point, I kept thinking, why weren't they proud of both of us? Why did it have to be one or the other?" I didn't have an answer for him. I'm not sure our parents had the self-awareness to answer it either. Tyler and I are in a careful, tentative place, not close, not estranged, honest, which might be the most we've ever been. As for my parents, they sold the Larchmont house in the fall of 2022. The $287,400 settlement, combined with the legal fees they'd paid Gerald Fitch's firm, had significantly destabilized their finances. My father took early retirement from Meridian Capital Bank in May 2022. I don't know whether it was voluntary. The BMW is gone. From what I understand through Tyler, they're in a smaller place in Ossining now, which is about 12 miles from Larchmont, and feels, for reasons I can't fully articulate, like exactly the right distance. My mother attempted contact in October 2022 through a letter sent to my new apartment address. I still don't know how she got it. The letter ran to 3 pages. It used the word love 14 times. It used the word sorry twice, and both times it was in the construction, "I'm sorry you feel that way," or "I'm sorry this happened," which is not, as my therapist will tell you, the same thing as an apology. I kept the letter for 2 weeks. I read it 4 times. Then I scanned it, sent the scan to Victoria for her files, and shredded the original. I haven't responded. I don't know if I will. There's a question people always ask when they hear this story. Do you think they knew what they were doing to you? I've thought about it a lot. My answer is yes and no. I think they knew they were making calls. I think they told themselves it was complicated, that they were keeping me close, keeping the family together, preventing a disruption to the only version of reality they knew how to manage. I think they built a story where the harm they were causing me was smaller in their minds than the fear of losing control. That's not a defense. It's just an explanation. And I've learned, slowly, that I can hold an explanation without it being a forgiveness. I am 29 years old. I have a job I'm genuinely good at. I have a 1-bedroom apartment with a bed frame I assembled myself and a diploma on the wall. I have a therapist I trust and a friend named Marcus who let me sleep in his spare room for 6 months and never once made me feel like a burden. I have clarity about who I am and what I survived. I have enough, more than enough. If you've made it this far, thank you. Genuinely. If this story touched something in you, hit that like button and subscribe if you want to hear more stories like this. Share it with someone who's been told in one way or another that they aren't enough. They need to hear what happens when you stop believing it. You don't owe anyone your silence, not even the people who taught you to stay quiet in the first place.